Hello, hello, everyone. Hello, everybody. Welcome to IPSI's Forum on Israel, Africa, and Black America. I am your host once again, Joshua Washington, Executive Director of the Institute for Black Solidarity with Israel. Soon I'll be co-hosted again by our Speakers Bureau Chief and member of our board, Olga Washington. Olga Mitchell Washington will be here in just a moment. It's good to be here with everyone. If you're on Clubhouse, you're on Instagram, ping your friends, ping your neighbors, tag your friends. We have some really important things to talk about today. Tag your friends. We're on Facebook. We're on YouTube. We are on Twitter. We are on all the social media links you see down there. And of course, Clubhouse as well. So please hop on and join us in this discussion. We'll be talking about a couple of different things today. I first want to start off just by saying that for those who've been following us in our peace initiative, Plan for Education, Advocacy, and Community Engagement, that things have been going very well. We're in the community engagement stage of our peace initiative. And so our IPSI ambassadors are in the process of planning their community work. We're starting off now with an event in each of their communities, and they are taking that and launching their community engagement piece of their peace initiative. And so we're really excited about that. I can't wait to share with you some of the very unique things that our ambassadors are doing. That's going to come very soon, but just know the peace initiative has not stopped. We are only continuing to go now. They're still talking about how much the South Africa and the Israel trip has changed their lives, quite literally. And some of them, there's still tears when we meet and discuss what they want to do and why they want to do it. It was a very powerful time. So again, thank you to those who gave to that and to ensure that we could have that whole year with our ambassadors. And now we're excited for this year with them as well. All right, so I want to start off. There are a couple of things I want to talk about today that we're going to discuss here. They kind of dovetail into one another. And when I hand it off to my co-host Olga, you'll see how there's a little bit of a tie-in there. But I first want to talk about Ethiopia. As some of us might know, and I say some of us because it really is not being reported on at all. Very little, I should say. As some of us may know, Ethiopia is in the middle of a civil war, in the midst of a civil war, I should say. I see that comment. Yes, we will be talking about BRICS in just a moment. As a matter of fact, if you have not, I will tease this. If you have not yet, IPSI and our Substack, we have just released an article about BRICS. Yes, I know Ethiopia has just joined BRICS. There's a link you can go to ibsi.substack.com. Olga has just finished an article that we have just published about BRICS and its impact that is being very understated and underrated right now. So you can read that. Go to ibsi.substack.com. Check out that article. Yes, Ethiopia is one of the countries that has joined BRICS along with a few others. We'll be talking about what that could mean and what's been going on with the summit soon. First, though, I wanted to talk about Ethiopia separately as a country. Like I said, for those who don't know, Ethiopia is in the midst of a very bitter civil war. And it's going on for a while now. First, it was just called the Tigray War because it was just in that region. Now it is spread. A lot of the fighting's happening in Amhara. And it's brutal. It's right now, there are some different factions and there are different alliances within the country, but now what it seems like is you have the government who's fighting against the people. Social media has been turned off or controlled, very heavily monitored by the government. A lot of things are going on, and there have been some developments even from Israel, the Ethiopian Jewish community in Israel. There are a lot of soldiers who have decided to go back to the place where maybe they came from as kids, or their parents or their grandparents came from, to fight and to help. And so we're actually going to share, I just want to share this few-minute video with you. reporting on what is happening and what is happening with these Ethiopian Israelis who are going back to Ethiopia to fight. Some of them giving up their lives to help and fight on behalf of the people. So, Maria, if we have that queued up, if you could please hit play and let's watch this video, please, just for a moment.
Now out of Africa, a civil war in a faraway country is breaking families in Israel. Ethiopian Jews, fathers and husbands, have gone to the battlegrounds of Amhara. Our correspondent Ariel Levin-Waldman spoke to one such family in Israel to find out more. Let's take a look.
Far away from their Israeli homeland, Israeli citizens fight and die for their birthplace. This was Ayisheshem Yohannes. He emigrated from Ethiopia about 20 years ago, but returned to fight in the African nation's bloody civil wars. 2 weeks ago, he died in Amhara.
As the years went on, he saw what was happening in Ethiopia and saw that the nation was suffering. He couldn't stay out anymore. So he went over to fight against the government. He joined the Fano militia and quickly rose to the ranks.
Ayisheshem was a soldier and then a police officer in Israel, and back in Amhara, his experience saw him leading over 1,000 Fano militiamen. The conflict gets little press in the West. Ethiopia has been in a state of civil war since 2018, and this month the government attempted to disarm the Fano militia, their former ally, reigniting the conflict in Amhara. For many Israelis, this faraway fight is too close to home.
It was very important to him, even more than his children or his family. It was his homeland. He still had family that remained in Ethiopia, and they had military background. They had always fought for their homeland and to do good.
There are 165,000 Ethiopians in Israel. Most have lived here for decades, but that doesn't mean that their hearts or families are undivided between their former and their current homes, especially when the news from their relatives is so grim.
They say the situation is not good. The government is just killing people, innocent people, women, the elderly. My family feels the danger. They feel there's no one to stop the government. No one is in control. There is nothing. It is impossible to live that way.
That led Ayisheshem to leave his wife and children and travel to an active war zone, torn between the family he built, safe in Israel's center, and the family he came from, vulnerable to war.
My father wanted peace in general. But he went there to protect his family, his mother, his grandfather. They're old and very much in danger. They need someone to protect them.
The Israeli state has done limited rescue missions so far, earlier in the month flying about 200 Israeli citizens and Jews out of Ethiopia and to Israel, but they have ruled out further rescues, as the state looks to address just who counts as Jewish and qualifies to enter, and who will be left behind. To many Ethiopians, this is not a matter of policy. Rather, it's about the lack of interest the rest of the world has had on the war that shattered their lives.
I want the whole world to know what's going on over there. They're just killing people, murdering like it's nothing, and the world is silent.
There's nothing at all in the media. Compare that to other wars like Ukraine, where there's wall-to-wall coverage, but on Ethiopia, there's barely a word.
That has in part been due to a digital blackout. Ethiopia's government has shut down the internet multiple times during the conflict and still maintains heavy controls on social media. But in this community is a bitter anger that this has been ignored as just another African war.
No one over there right now is a saint to show another way in this conflict. It's a very primitive world there. It's not like Europeans. They have a very different mindset. He believed he could go and change that you could negotiate a way out. I know this was what he wanted because he was a man of peace and unity.
It is impossible to say how many men like Ayisheshem are out there right now. There is obviously no registry, and word of mouth is the only exposure they get.
All right, turn my video back on here. So that is what's happening in Ethiopia currently, and we, our CEO and founder, that video was sent to him by one of our Ethiopian partners, one of our Ethiopian Jewish friends, and I was talking to my wife about this earlier today, which is a shame. We were watching this. We were aware of the Civil War. We've been following different things, but one thing that we noticed is that, excuse me, one thing that we noticed that it's kind of difficult to find coverage on this. You see a news thing here, a video here. That was I-24 News, which is one of the prominent news stations in Israel, but not a lot of stuff over here. And just like the young man said, excuse me, whose father died in the Civil War, he said, okay, we have wall-to-wall coverage about Ukraine right now. I mean, what's there's almost nothing about us. And which, again, like I said, this is going to tie into the whole BRICS conversation, because at the same time, Ethiopia is one of the countries that has joined BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. Now has other countries as well with it. But this is what's going on. One thing that really resonated and kind of just hit me hard was that the reason why most, not all, and I do want to stress this. I did a podcast about maybe 2 years ago with a friend of mine from Israel, and she's Ethiopian, and we were talking about Aliyah. I've done a few interviews with different Ethiopian Jews about how they came to Israel, how their parents got to Israel. And one of my friends said, well, my mom was actually pregnant with me when they got here. But my friend, she was telling me that she, her story and her family story isn't quite the same as other Ethiopian Jews. The mainstream story is that there were Ethiopian Jews who were being persecuted by the Ethiopian Christians. And when they found out that Israel had been reborn, right? That Jerusalem was a city again. A lot of them just started walking from Ethiopia to Israel through Sudan, and many of them died on the journey. They didn't know how far it was. They didn't know how much they'd have to walk. A lot of them ran out of food, ran out of water. It was gruesome, and the way that the difficulty of the traveling and everything. But she was telling the story. But my friend, when she was telling me, she said, that wasn't my family story. My family actually owned a lot of land. We were very wealthy. But my parents made the choice. They said, look, she said, I asked my dad, she was like, Dad, you would rather be, why would you want to go to Israel? You don't know how to speak Hebrew, so you wouldn't speak the prevailing language and all those things. And he told her, I'd rather be in Israel, live in middle class, figuring out how to speak Hebrew and doing all that stuff, than to be rich here in Ethiopia. That is how Zionist the Ethiopians were. But by and large, a lot of them left. A lot of them were fleeing persecution. A lot of them faced persecution on their way as they were journeying through Sudan. A lot of people were murdered by Sudanese bandits. A lot of women were raped, children were killed, all those different things. I mean, a lot of people died. And so for some Ethiopians, when they think about Ethiopia, they think, well, my home is in Israel, right? I don't really remember it. It represents very harsh times for my family. So for these young Ethiopian Jewish men, for these young Israelis to give up their lives and go back to, yes, the country of their birth or the country of their parents' birth, to go back to that country where many of their families left because of persecution and fight for those people, right? They're not the same people, but still the symbolism of you're going back and you're defending a country that may not have the best memories for you. You're defending a country that you don't have good stories to tell about, maybe when you were younger. To go back, to have this tugging in your heart to go back and fight is such a it's a Jewish value, right? Moving forward and letting go. When you let go and you move forward, you're able to see things for what they are. And you might actually find yourself in a situation like that, where you're actually helping a country or people that wouldn't have helped you. Some of which anyway, not all. And it's just beautiful for me to see that. But yes, many of them are going, some are losing their lives. It's very, it's very tragic, and it's something, again, like the young man said, no one's really talking about this. And I think it's because it's Africa, right? It's not Europe. It's not. There was an Indian man who was at a summit, and when Olga gets here, I'll ask her about it because she remembers. He was at this global summit and debating with these other world leaders from different parts of the world. And one of the questions that was asked of him, and he was talking about how India, he was talking about BRICS, he was talking about India and what India needs to do and how India needs to, look out for India. And he was listing certain things. And one of the questions I was asked of him is, well, what is your stance on Russia and Ukraine? What are you doing to support the Ukrainian people? Now, I'm going to say this for anyone who thinks I'm trying to rag on Ukraine. There's nothing against Ukraine or anyone. We're talking about what countries have to do for themselves, right? So they asked him, they said, what are you going to do? How is your country helping Ukraine? And he said, why is it that the West's problems are the rest of our problems, but our problems aren't your problems? He said, why is it that the rest of the world's problems are not the West's problems, but the West's problems are the rest of the world's problems? He wasn't saying screw Ukraine. He was saying, okay, India has a ton of issues and you guys don't ever, how come the question doesn't come up, what are you doing to help the people of India? How come the question never comes up, what are you doing to aid the people in Ethiopia? Why is it that when our Western brothers and sisters have issues, we all have to get involved? But when we have issues, it's, well, you got to deal with that for yourself. And that's what the sentiment that this young man, that if you watch the video, and you can, again, we posted it we retweeted it. It's on IPSI's Twitter page, IBSI now. You can check it out. He was saying, look, like there's wall-to-wall coverage about Ukraine. And great, that's fantastic. We're dying out here. Our government is killing us. Our government is shutting down our social media. Our government's shutting our power off. There was another video about a woman who they were hearing rumors about government military men and other bandits killing Ethiopians in Amhara. And so she and her husband and her son were trying to kind of hide and get away. And she said her husband and son went to go investigate. They heard some noises. They wanted to see what was going on. They both got killed. And she was talking about, there's another video that I should have linked as well, but I'll make sure we post from IPSI. Her husband and son got killed. And like, again, it's not common knowledge. I was upset that the only way that we knew about it and we continue to know about it is because we have friends who used to live in the region. We have friends in Israel who are following this, right? This was I-24 news I was reporting. We happen to follow that. We have friends in different parts. But I mean, if you're not deep into this work, like some of you are who are watching, you would have known nothing about it. Nothing. The first time I ever heard about anything outside of my parents, right? Outside of my father talking with us, the first time that I ever heard outside of that stuff going on in Ethiopia was years ago. It was in the early 2010s. I was in LA, in Los Angeles, for some music. I was playing some music for another artist, and that artist happened to have she had an entourage with her, and a few of her friends were Ethiopian. And one of my friends, I remember her name is Asqual. She was just talking about some stuff that was going on between Ethiopia and Eritrea. And then it hit me. I was like, you know what? That I've never even heard of that conflict before. Like, not outside of, we talked here and there, but I was like, yeah, they're really, I mean, I know there's lots of news out there, so the media has to kind of, there's a lot of information. You got to pick and choose. But golly, like when one thing is going wall to wall, bumper to bumper every day for 2 weeks, it just feels a little bit, it stings a little bit to know, okay, but I get that you have to report on, what you can report on, but my gosh, like, obviously there's some imbalance going on. If we only, like, if you ask someone, how many wars are happening in the world? I bet most people would say, one, probably Ukraine, right? I mean, that's how much is being reported on. No, there's tons of wars happening everywhere. So all that being said, for those who are watching now, and I see this comment here, it says, yes, I said the same thing. They say the birth rate is low, but not in many places in Africa, but they will say it's worldwide. Yes. Absolutely. So, and the thing is, I would urge those who are watching us now, whether in your Clubhouse, you're on Instagram, you're on YouTube or whatever. Again, you can find that video. You can go to even if you're not on Twitter, you can find us at IBSI now. Share that link, share that video. I think we also post it on our Facebook. It's on Instagram. Share it with, even if you just have 20 people following you, share it with those 20 people. Share it, tell them to share it, text it to your friends. Let them know this needs to be a thing. Like this needs to be, we need to rally around this. We can't just care about something when someone tells us that we need to care about it. These things are, and when I say someone, I mean, mainstream news. Like there are lots of things going on in the world, and it also needs our attention. So, yes. Oh, you're in Canada, by the way. And I'll talk about this a little bit more later, but IPSI is, we have some events happening the rest of this year. We have one in Atlanta later in September, but join our newsletter so you can get more information on that. IPSI is doing a series of events in 2024 called Africa and Israel, Looking Back and Moving Forward. We're doing these events all over the world. And one of the places we're going to is Toronto, Canada. Now, I don't know if you're in Toronto, Canada, or in that area on the East Coast, but that's where we'll be. We're partnering with the Canadian Anti-Semitism Education Foundation. So if you want to know more about it, we haven't made any posts about it yet. We're just I've been in Zoom meetings for the past few days, back to back with different partners, California, Chicago, Toronto, Canada, and here in Charlotte, North Carolina, and now Atlanta as of earlier today. So it's all over, and we're going to culminate it with a big event in Israel, Hanukkah 2024. So we're working on that now. Jerusalem probably partnering with we are already talking with and making plans with our partners that stand with us. Israel, we're going to do something big in Jerusalem. So if you're anywhere in those parts of the world, or you want us to come to your neck of the woods, there's still time. We're in the planning stages. Hit us up. It's called Africa and Israel, Looking Back and Moving Forward. It'll be a musical event. There'll be some dynamic speakers, deep speakers, really talking and actually getting into the meat of what this whole thing looks like. Why is Africa seemingly becoming more of a conversation? The fact that Africa really is on the rise, the fact that Africa really is realizing more and more her potential and power, and how Israel is on the cutting edge of that, and how this alliance can really be something huge. We're going to be doing that in a way I think that hasn't really been done in this space, which is there's going to be lots of live music. There's going to be lots of beautiful displays, and there'll be some really great speakers there as well. It's going to be awesome. So if you want to be a part of it, if I listed a city that you're in, mark your make a note, follow us, join our mailing list. We'll be sharing more about that. We'll be posting a tour poster soon. Scan the QR code and donate, because your donations go to things like that, right? When we plan stuff at IPSI, I just want to say one last thing. Most of us, or all of us, and my father is pastor, we're all Christians, and we take that scripture, we walk by faith and not by sight, very literally. And so there are times when we know we're supposed to do something and we just move and do it, even though we may not have everything in place. And things always come into place. Sometimes it's a fight, sometimes it's a struggle, but we get there, and we get there with what we need. And so as I'm saying these things, I'm telling you right now, we are in the very beginning stages of fundraising. We haven't even really started to fundraise for this initiative. And so please scan the QR code that's up in the corner. If you're on Instagram, if you are on Clubhouse, ibsi.org/donate. Become a legacy builder. You can give once a month, set up a monthly thing, and help us continue this work, because it's very important. And like I said, we move and we do what we feel we're supposed to do. And we trust God, we trust Hashem that he'll bring things together, and he always has. So that's just a quick commercial. Now, in talking about Ethiopia, I know that my co-host is coming very soon. And again, if you are not following us on Substack, subscribe to IPSI Substack, ibsi.substack.com. And you can get our articles. We're going to start up our podcast again very soon. And you can subscribe for free, although some of our articles are for paid subscribers. When we restart our podcast, that will be for paid subscribers as well. If you want to support IPSI anyway, please consider becoming a paid subscriber to our Substack. That also helps us. Anything you can do that brings in the money for IPSI, we can do the work we're going to do and do it freely and do it with excellence. So ibsi.substack.com. Olga has written an article that is very powerful. I'm going to bring her on in just a second to discuss it. It's a timely article, very much needed, and the article is titled "Why the West's Dismissal of BRICS Will Prove Unwise." Why the West's dismissal of BRICS will prove unwise. Yes, so you can already see the tone of this article. Very well written, very powerful, prophetic, and we'll see all of why it's prophetic in the years to come. But this is a very, very big shift. And so Olga will come on in just a moment and talk about it. Oh, she is here. Okay, go ahead and bring her on, Maria. I'm waiting. There we go. Hello, Miss Olga. How are you, ma'am?
How are you, sir? Well, thank you. How are you?
Good. I'm doing well. Thank you very much. We were just discussing, we were just finishing up discussing what's happening in Ethiopia right now with the civil war and how it's not really getting a lot of attention. Do you remember the name, by the way, remember there was a global summit, and I'm putting you on the spot here, but there's this Indian man, he was an official, and someone had asked him, what is India, how is India supporting Ukraine in this Russia-Ukraine war? And he said, why are the West's problems the world's problems, but the world's problems aren't the West's problems? Do you remember that? Do you remember that?
It was somebody very senior in the Indian government, and if I'm not mistaken, it was last year.
It was last year.
I don't recall who it was. It could have been the Prime Minister or somebody of that seniority. But yes, I do remember that. And he pretty much pushed back and said that India was not going to be forced to take a stand based on what the West or anybody else wanted them to do, but it was going to take a stand based on its own interests.
Absolutely. And I was just saying that it's a recurring theme we're seeing here. We talked about it last week with different African countries saying, yeah, we're not, I know you're America, I know you're Europe, all that stuff, but we're not doing this stuff. You can't bully us anymore.
Yeah.
And that theme was continued when we were watching the video of the young Ethiopian soldier whose father had just died fighting in Ethiopia, right? Israeli, right? He died in the Civil War. He said, look, there's wall-to-wall coverage, nothing against Ukraine, but there's wall-to-wall coverage of what's happening in Ukraine. And there's been almost nothing about our social media is being taken over, our power is being shut off. The government's like exercising they're overreaching with their power and nothing's going on. And I think there's more of this realization on the continent that, just like the Indian man said, it just seems like our problems aren't yours, but your problems are ours. So with that in mind, let's talk about your article, Olga. Your article you just finished pinning and we put on our Substack called "Why the West's Dismissal of BRICS Will Prove Unwise." And I'm getting a note right here because I want to make sure I get his name. He's the Indian Minister of External Affairs. His name is, and I apologize in advance, it's a very long name, Subramanyam Jaishankar. Subramanyam Jaishankar. He's the Indian Minister of External Affairs. And we'll repost. We posted it before. We'll repost that because it was a very powerful moment. These moments are very crucial, and how he responded. So now, Olga, explain to us, please, a little bit about just the tone of your article. Where were you coming from with it? What were you saying in it?
So first of all, the whole article away, because people need to subscribe onto our Substack, Africa Israel Weekly. There's great material there, and this is just another avenue for IPSI with regards to our education. I will say that the tone is not alarmist, but it's kind of like, wake up, pay attention. This is what's happening. This is what's been happening. For some people, they only know BRICS of recent years, but BRICS has been around since the early 2000s. And not only the fact that BRICS exists, but how it's growing economically and what that means, potential rivalry and what that means for the G7 group of nations. I can unpack it a little bit later as we discuss, but also what it means for the G20. And I'm happy to explain those terms for those that don't know. But really, there's a shift in both the economic power center in the world as well as the political center in the world. More and more, there is this growing determination to shift away from the dollar being the dominant currency for international trade. And also from a cultural as well as ideological basis, there's a growing movement of countries who now call themselves the Southern it's like the Southern countries. So not countries that are normally associated with the West, not countries that are normally associated with the European Union. There's a growing call amongst them to say, actually, we want to start being treated equally. We want to start being recognized for who we are and how we are. Let me say this before I hand it back to you for us to, unpack it with more detail, is that prior to the summit, which happened last week in South Africa, there were 5 countries that were part of the BRICS group: Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. And those countries together comprised 40% of the world's global population. 40% of the world's global population, and rivaled the economies of the G7 countries combined. That was before the summit last week. And one of the consequences, or rather one of the results from the summit, is that the BRICS group has grown. And so that number is even larger.
Sheesh. So we don't know the percentage right now with these new countries of the world's economic wealth, do we?
Well, we do. It's around 46% now.
Sure.
So think about it. There are now 11 countries. There are 6 countries that have been added, or at least invited, to join BRICS. And there's going to be a process between now and the 1st of January 2004. And if all of those processes are adhered and everything is all well, then those 6 countries will join BRICS, which means that the BRICS bloc is going to comprise 11 countries. And those 11 countries cover countries from South America, Africa, and Asia. And then there's also Russia. There's the Middle East is making an appearance in BRICS. We've got Iran. Conversation for another day. That's a concern. We've also got Saudi Arabia as well as the United Arab Emirates.
Sure.
Yeah.
It's interesting because you have a country like Iran, who's Israel's arch nemesis. Then you have a country like UAE, who signed the Abraham Accords, and it's like opening and like historically opening up these different ties with Israel, culturally, politically, business-wise, everything. Like, why? What is the? I mean, I guess I know that Israel was not the focus of BRICS, obviously, because Israel wasn't included. But what are these countries? What's the overlap? What do they have in common, or what is that?
So there are things that they have in common, and there's things that they don't have in common, right? So there's also this mentality of, or that's at least existed up until now, that if you are friends with this particular country, you have to be enemies with everybody else. So if I'm your friend, and your enemies are my enemies, even if they're not necessarily my enemies. But now we've got these countries saying, actually, we're going to look out for our interests. And if these countries on the menu of the world's countries suit and meet our objectives, we're going to befriend them. Even if it means that on another menu, these other countries are going to meet our needs, we're also going to engage with them. Some people, some political analysts for several years have been saying that this is an example of why BRICS is not going to become anything really significant, why it won't be able to have real political clout, because there are real challenges and real differences. One of the differences that I note in the article is that some of the BRICS countries are democracies, for example, South Africa, India, as well as Brazil. But But then you've got other entities such as China as well as Russia, and we're not even going to go into the likes of Iran that are autocracies, right? And so even politically, how they govern their people is very different. An issue of human rights is also something that's of concern. China and its human rights violations, Russia and its human rights violations. But then you've got a country like India and Brazil that like to align themselves with the West as being champions of human rights. Those are in contradiction to each other. But, and this is what the attitudes of these countries are saying, is that if I'm able to get something from a country that is of benefit to my people, I'm going to do it. And if you don't like it, okay, that's also fine.
It's interesting to me because when you explain it that way, it doesn't really sound that different from how it doesn't really sound that different from how our country would make our country. I know your country, South Africa, America, like would make our decisions as well. Which is, yeah, sometimes we know that the people that we're, allyship doesn't equal friendship. We've talked about that, right? Allyship, good, real allyship in terms of when we're talking about, us coming together for a common cause, that has to be birthed from friendship. When we're talking about diplomacy, it's not always, we like each other. We're buddies holding hands, walking around all the time. I mean, that was one of the biggest things that was said by a lot of South African officials, including we talked with even your parents, who said that, Nelson Mandela and Yasser Arafat, they did work together, but there wasn't, Nelson didn't put all his trust in the PLO and Yasser Arafat. It was two different things, right? And Nelson Mandela still defended Israel's right to exist and to have secure borders, but he also acknowledged people who helped South Africa during apartheid and who actually ended South Africa. So there's this, it's not unlike, I feel like, decisions that we might make over here based on our own self-interest. Well, yeah, but go ahead. What were you going to say?
I would agree in part with you, and then I'm also going to challenge you a little bit. And my challenge comes in from a place of, respectfully so, the attitude displayed by America and other countries in the West, and it was actually more fully expounded in Pastor Dumisani, our CEO's article that he wrote, I'm not mistaken, about 2 weeks ago. And the attitude of the United States and the West is, yes, we're going to look after our own interests. And while we do so, we're going to tell everybody else what they need to do. So because this is what we want to do and how we want to do it, we are going to demand from other countries that they need to follow suit.
Right.
That is an attitude that the African countries detest. It is an attitude, and I also speak to this in the article, that has encouraged a movement away from the West and to these countries that are coming together to say, we're talking about mutual respect here. We want to have the same level of respect because we hold the same economic power, because we have the same resources, we're able to contribute the same, we're able to do so many things. And if we differ on ideological values, if we differ on cultural values, if we differ on even religious values, okay, fine, we differ. But we're not demanding that you become who we are in order to engage with us. And so that is where I do differ with you in relation to the attitude of the United States of America. Because I think that there is some nuance that the United States, together with European countries and other countries in the West, have not applied. And as a result of that, are finding themselves more and more isolated as it comes to the BRICS bloc, as well as the African Union and other African-focused organizations. Something interesting to note, Joshua, is that even though the summit was for these 5 countries and then the invitation of the 6 in terms of joining, there were 67 leaders of various countries and organizations from across the world that were invited. And do you know that none of those leaders represented a single country from North America and from Europe? Not one. Wow. Those countries were invited were from Southern America, Latin America, from Asia, from the Caribbean, and and obviously Africa. Those were the ones that were invited. Last week we spoke a little bit about the French president asking to say, can France come? And it was like, no, thank you. So there really is this, as I'm talking, it almost like feels as if there's like this turning their back to be like, actually, you know what? We're going to do this on our own terms. But interestingly, there still is a willingness to work with these other nations. By way of an example, India is the new chairperson or the chair country for the G20. which is a block of countries that more speaks about like the political happenings across the world and what needs to be done. So you have India that's sitting on the G20 and chairing the G20, but also India is a member of BRICS.
That is something very interesting, and agreeing with you. I don't think we disagree, even to what I was saying, because what I was saying was actually in almost like in rebuttal to what we are doing, which you're laying out, which is that America, the West, is demanding that everyone else kind of model after the West in order to work with them. What I was saying was, as ghastly as some people, some leaders on the West think it is, that BRICS is comprised of countries, and now they've invited in Iran and all that stuff, and they're working with these countries that are committing human rights violations, but they're also trying to serve their own best interests. We do the same thing. Like, you know, we also, so that, like, and people, I don't understand. Well, people don't understand some of the alliances that we have, right? Like, they don't understand some of the people that we've aligned with as well, but we try to do the best we can for our we're supposed to anyway. But you're absolutely correct. The only difference is that we're also demanding that other people do the same thing. We were in South Africa, our last trip there, the trip before last, with the ambassadors. And we were on a bus driving through Soweto. We were in Soweto at the time. And there were like stickers all over the place, just in certain parts, about abortion, getting abortion. Like, here's a number to call, and I noticed that. I was like, wow, only in certain parts. And we were talking about how, and you could tell from the stickers that the organization was not an African one, right? It was either American or Western, whatever. And we were talking about how no matter what your stance is on that, right? And I don't mind. I post about that. I'm pro-life and we're pro-life. But no matter what your stance is on it, that is not the African culture. It's just not. And so, but that's another example of the West. And we even talked about it. There was a commentator that was talking about how there was even aid that was being withheld from certain African countries because they didn't have a certain number of clinics in their country that provided abortions. Okay, so now you're going to play with our aid money. And so now more and more young leaders and others are saying, you know what, we don't need your money at all. How about that? How about we just stop playing this game where you say, be like us, or we don't help you eat and live? Like, what the heck is that? And so that it's a good thing that what's happening right now. And like you said, it's Africa's more and more realizing that. But also what's interesting is that, and I don't want you to talk too much about the article because I do want people to read it, because it is it's nuanced. There's a lot of stuff in there. Again, go to ibsi.substack.com, subscribe, become a paid subscriber, read the article, share it with your friends. But the fact that these countries like India are the chairperson or the chair country of G20 and on BRICS, what is that? What are the implications of something like that? What does that mean? Not just economically now, but now we're just talking about in terms of just global influence. What is this? What could this mean going forward for these countries?
Well, the first major thing is that there's no singular dominant country or block of countries that dictate how relations are supposed to happen, whether those relations are trade, or there's diplomacy, or there's cultural engagement, or even financing. Something that I speak briefly to in the article as well is the fact that there is a bank that has been created by BRICS called the New Development Bank, and they are looking to engage with their members and also non-members in local currencies. Right. And they're wanting to move away from everything having to be controlled by the dollar. So there's also the shift with regards to agreements that can be made with different countries, how those countries need to not only trade with each other, but how they're going to navigate those relationships. So I believe that there is a shaking of the system in relation to just dominance by the West and dominance by Europe, which will allow for potentially, and I say potentially because I do think it's going to take a few years for this to unravel, but it's unraveling. I mean, as I was doing the research for the article, I did come across many correspondents, political analysts that were like, yeah, this is not going to happen. It's a pipe dream. And it's like, okay, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 years later, look at where we are. Look at where we are, where you've got over 37 countries having formally applied to become members. Not just raise their hand and say, you know what, I think I like this. It's like, no, 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 no. We want to get membership. We want to be part of it. And that continues to grow. So it changes where and with whom organizations can engage with each other. I think there is an opportunity to reimagine and to become very creative with regards to where things need to be. Africa, even more so, is becoming a powerhouse. Africa is being recognized for its positioning at the G20 that's going to be happening in about 2-3 weeks, that India is going to be chairing. India has been like, okay, hold on. We come from a grouping of countries that has traditionally been left out of these types of conversations, and we want them in. And one of the things that India is going to be putting forward at the G20 is permanent membership of the African Union. Because the European Union has been a member of the G20 for a while, but no, let's not look at Africa, and let's not look at the continent that has got the world's most resources. Let's not look at the continent that really holds the world's largest population of young people, and that's going to be continuing to grow. Right?
And the union that's older and that came before
that's older
the
than the European Union. Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes, even though it comes from the Organization of African Unity, but that it was just a different format. But yes, you're right in terms of it's much older. So Africa is coming to the fore again, even more. If a country like China, which is the world's second largest economy and growing, and India, which at the moment is the world's, if I'm not mistaken, fifth largest economy and growing, and countries like Saudi Arabia with oil, United Arab Emirates with oil, are looking to Africa and saying, hold up, there's something in Africa. The question that I then have is, why is the West not taking a look at this? And one of the people that I quote in the article actually says that it would be folly for the West to continue to have this attitude that we can run the world on our terms, because those terms are changing. That was a very long answer to your question. But yes, there's lots of new avenues that are opening up, and there's a reimagining of relationships that's taking place.
I think you're absolutely right. We keep coming back to this. Last week, I think we kind of ended by talking about how power is shifting to the West. I mean, to the East. Sorry, power shifting away from the West.
To the East and South.
East, yes, East and South. Yes, ma'am. And it's even so we're seeing on a political scale, and that's what we talk about here at IPSI. It's happening on every level. It's happening culturally, even in terms of music. There are sounds that are just becoming more dominant here in the West that we're actually getting from the East now, right? There are things that there are cultures and even in terms of Black Americans finding out more about their heritage and music that's coming out and art that's coming out, and things that have always been there. It's not like it's new. Have always been there. Like, for instance, the genre Afrobeats. It's like a new thing here. Afrobeats has been a thing for so long. Like, we're the last people to really get into it. But it's a symbolic. All of this is like it's symbolic of, there's something. It's symbolic of the East actually becoming now the trendsetter and the influencers. And so, Olga, I do want to ask you one last question about your article. Again, you can go to ipsi.org. If you go to ibsi.org, there's a link that says Africa Israel Weekly. You can click on that and read the article. Olga, you said, and I'm just going to read a part of it here. You said the 2023 BRICS Summit underscores the erosion of Western hegemony in global affairs. The economic power, significant population and resources, and potential for enhanced international collaboration presents BRICS as a formidable force shaping the future of global politics, economics, and diplomacy. We are living in a time where strategic relations around the world are being redefined as the current global order is being challenged. Now, my question to you with that is, in this very pivotal time, it's a very crucial time. It seems like every decision is very important right now. These different leaders, what they're going to decide to do. Are they going to acquiesce again to the West? Are they going to stand up for themselves and say, no, this is not what we're going to do? What can this mean, and what does this mean for the continued Africa-Israel relationship in this shift that's happening right now? Israel is in the East. It's a democracy, so they see it as like a Western country in the East. But what does this mean for the Africa-Israel relationship?
I mean, For us at IPSI, and for me personally, it's even more exciting because the first thing that we need to recognize is that there is a growing trend of countries paying attention to Africa and being like, oh, wait, maybe there is something that Africa has to offer. And frankly, Israel has been a friend of Africa as we explore at IPSI since antiquity, right? From Queen Mashedo and King Solomon, but also in the early days of the freedom of from colonialism on the African continent. Israel was there. Israel was present on the African continent. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu several years ago uttered those incredible words that Africa is coming back to Israel and Israel is coming back to Africa. So as in terms of the movement of countries working with Africa, Israel's already there. What's also interesting is the fact that there are agendas or items on the agendas for these countries, for BRIC countries, for African countries, for countries in the global south, for countries in the east, that are of more importance than those issues that are highlighted by the West. The Ukraine-Russian war is important, but not as important to these countries. And issues such as counterterrorism and cybersecurity and food security are issues that are really, really prevalent and of high priority. Israel has the technology in relation to this. It has the innovation in relation to this. So here's an opportunity for all that Israel can offer, that she can do so even more and do so even more powerfully. So it's a very exciting time. Also culturally, in terms of values, from a Judeo-Christian perspective, there's a lot of alignment of values, but even in terms of things such as family and the value for life and education, there's lots of similarities there. So there's great things happening. There's also the very concerning things. And some of that speaks to not only the Africa-Israel relationship, but also what this means for African countries and countries that find themselves in a similar position as Africa, where there's a problem with terrorism. Let's not forget how Iran funds terrorism, not only in the Middle East, but also on the African continent. One of the things that we as IPSI have already explored, and I would encourage whoever's listening, if you're interested to see the impact of this, that terrorism has shifted from being the highest in the Middle East to now being on the African continent. So if you're not going to engage with relations with a country such as Iran, which is a proxy for many of these terrorist organizations that we have across the world, what does that mean for the safety and the security of the African people? Also, yes, China has brought great infrastructure to the African continent. China is investing greatly with regards to the economy and economic empowerment. And what is the cost to that? What has the cost of that been? What is it going to be as well? There's talk of an economic colonization that is taking place across the African continent by China. We can't turn our backs on that. Russia as well. So yes, there's things that Russia has to offer us. There's also problems with regards to the Russia relationship. So as it pertains to the African countries on their own, there really are some problems that we now need to consider as well as recognize. Whilst at the same time, there are these great opportunities. And it is my hope and my prayer that people that are invested and see the not only redemptive purpose of the Africa-Israel relationship, but really want to see the empowerment of the African people, as well as the betterment and the strengthening of the Africa-Israel relationship, that they will encourage African nations and work with IPSI and DAISY and other organizations that are in the weeds of this, to strengthen relationships and ties and create avenues for education and engagement with countries where we can further galvanize, not only support for, but bring to the fore the very Zionist DNA of these countries and these cultures, and not allow, as these countries are moving more and more into the arms of the Chinas of the world and the Russias of the world and the Irans of the world, to then also adopt an ideology that says Israel is evil, Israel is not our friend, we shouldn't work with Israel, because we know both from history, but also in terms of scripture, that that will not bode well for any country, but more specifically for countries across Africa.
Spot on. And I wanted to say, because we're getting a lot of, we usually don't get this many people on Clubhouse. It's usually like 1 or 2 people. I see now we have about 10 people have entered into the room. We have a few people on Instagram. This is obviously a topic of very high interest. Someone commented in the chat on Clubhouse. Oh, and I apologize. They're saying they can't share the room because it's private. Someone commented on the Clubhouse that they didn't know that Iran was funding terror in Africa. If I'm not mistaken, the number one sponsor for terror in Africa right now is Iran. Am I correct in saying that? I mean, go ahead.
Yeah, it just uses different fronts.
Mm-hmm.
It uses different fronts for terrorism, but 100% Iran is there, and so it's sad that Iran on the one hand is shaking hands and signing agreements, and everybody's all excited that here's a strengthening of relations with Iran. Meanwhile, Iran's funding it. It is an unfortunate, I think, cycle that we also see on the African continent, where many of our wars, unfortunately, are both funded in terms of the fighting of the war by the same party that is defending the war, right? So we've got the same entity that's creating the fighting amongst ourselves. And so now we've got an entity that's saying, come, let me help you and let me work with you. But at the same time is causing the death, the destruction of our families and the life on our continent. It's very, very concerning.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so these are all things that we need to be continuing to monitor. That's the kind of the heart of your article, which is to use a modern vernacular. Don't sleep on BRICS, right? Like we need to let's not sleep on what's going on, you guys. Let's not dismiss what's happening here, because indeed power is shifting, whether it shifts in a good way or in a bad way. The West is losing its influence more and more. People are less and less impressed. And they're seeing how things are being run over here. I mean, not to get into all that other stuff, but it's very apparent. What may not be as apparent to us here in this country living here is very apparent to countries around the world. And they're looking for other ways. They're looking for other ways. And that's what's happening right now. And so absolutely. So Olga, first of all, I want to thank you for co-hosting and for sharing and for writing the article. Again, for those who have not seen the article, someone shared the link in Clubhouse. I appreciate it. You go to ibsi.org and you can click on Africa Israel Today is what it's called. Africa Israel Weekly. And you will see articles that we've written. The latest one now is this one we've been talking about, which is called Why the West's Dismissal of BRICS Will Prove Unwise. And that was an article penned by Olga Mishway Washington. I will also I'm trying to pin it to our room here in Clubhouse, if it'll let me do that. But again, ibsi.org, click on Africa Israel Weekly, and you can check that out for yourself. Olga, any other last thoughts you want to leave with us?
Well, an important one is, are you wearing the same t-shirt as me? Ha, you are. You are. Okay. Have you told people where they can get this?
Oh, I have not told people where they can get this.
Hey. All right, I'm going to tell them. I'm going to tell them. So IPSI's got incredible merchandise that speaks strength, that speaks about the Africa-Israel relationship, whether it's this Iron Lion Zion t-shirt that not only adults can wear, but there's also versions for the little ones. If I'm not mistaken, it's like a cub instead of like proper lion.
Yeah, lion
it's
cub.
cute. It's cute either way. And we also have t-shirts with quotes from various Zionist leaders, including Martin Luther King, as well as mugs. And there's things really for any person in the family. So if you love what you see, if you want to be a walking message of peace, as well as Africa to Israel and the strengthening of those relationships and prosperity, then go to our website, ipsi.org, and you can purchase it.
That is another way you can support us in what we're doing at IPSI. Now that I have more people here also in Clubhouse, I want to say again, IPSI, we're always doing work. We're doing program. We're doing community engagement. We're working on community events now with our IPSI ambassadors. We have an event series coming up in 2024. It's actually a tour. It's called Africa and Israel, Looking Back and Moving Forward. It's going to be centered on live music. There'll be lots of dynamic speakers. It'll be a beautiful display. There's lots of stuff that's going to be happening. It's going to be so amazing. We're already planning it again in Chicago, in LA, in Toronto, Canada, Atlanta. It's all going to, and that's so far, it's all going to culminate to one big event in Israel during Hanukkah 2024. Lots of live music, lots of great speakers, and really getting into the meat of what this Africa-Israel relationship has always been like since ancient times, and then what it is now and how we can continue this moving forward. We're going to get deeper into what we've been talking about and hearing some very, very prominent African leaders, Israeli leaders, Jewish leaders, Christian leaders, people who are doing this work. So if you want to continue to support us, if you're listening to this, if you've enjoyed this, you can scan the QR code that's up in the corner. If you're on Instagram or Clubhouse, ibsi.org, ibsi.org/donate, become a legacy builder. Become a legacy builder, which means it's a monthly donation that you give to IPSI. You can give a small amount if you want to, but every donation, every legacy builder that gets added to our list is a huge help. It helps us to continue to do this work of Black and Jewish Africa-Israel solidarity. So please continue to support IPSI, become a paid subscriber to our Substack, whatever you can do. We appreciate it, and it'll also help us to move forward with these events. Again, Africa and Israel, looking back and moving forward. Your donations will help us to make these things what they need to be. And we hope to see you in your area. If you didn't hear your city listed, reach out to us and let's get something planned. Let's do it. We want to come to where you are and do this celebration. For legacy builders, you can give as small as $10 a month. Okay, $10 a month. Maybe don't get coffee twice, each week or something, and instead give $10 a month to IPSI. Maybe don't get gummy worms or something. I don't know what your favorite thing is. Mine is gummies. Don't get that, and make that sacrifice and help us continue the work that we're doing. If you believe that what we're doing is good and it's going to shift the tide. Yes, Olga, go ahead.
Sorry, before we log off, there's a question that's come in. I think it's from Anne, if I'm pronouncing the name correctly. And that is, Olga, which countries are the closest friends of Israel? I think that we should unpack that at another session, and because it's complex and layered, and there's some interesting dynamics that are at play there. But for now, let me say that it depends on what platform you're looking at the friendship. So it is over, oh goodness, I looked at the numbers a few weeks ago. You're looking at close to, if I'm not mistaken, 80% of these countries have got trade relations with Israel. So, or rather diplomatic and trade relations with Israel. So they are engaging culturally, they're engaging financially, they're engaging in terms of diplomats. There are projects on the ground by the Israeli government, by Israeli organizations happening across the African continent. But then you move to the United Nations, and these countries are not voting in a way that showcases the fact that they are actually friends of Israel and that they work with Israel and that they encourage Israel. So it's a very nuanced and layered relationship, one that definitely needs unpacking. In fact, it's something that we at IPSI have already spoken about, and if I'm not mistaken, also written an article, and that is that Africa needs to start behaving in a way that is consistent and that is fair to the relationship that it has with Israel. So it can't say, okay, Israel, I'm going to engage with you on these issues economically because I'm benefiting from you. But then when Israel is demonized in world bodies, more specifically the United Nations, when Israel is thrown out of organizations like the African Union, there's an attempt to do that. These friends of Africa just fold their hands and say, actually, you know what, Israel, you're on your own. Right? So it's a very interesting relationship there. Maybe one last thing about the relationship is that when the Trump administration several years ago moved its embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, which many countries had said that it was going to cause a major conflict and that there was going to be a problem, and how dare the United States take that position, the bloc of countries that was the most represented, it was over 30% in representation at the embassy opening, were African countries. And there are African countries, the most recent one being Sierra Leone. My tongue has put up their hand and said, we're opening an embassy in Jerusalem because we recognize that Jerusalem is the undivided eternal capital of Israel. And that's not a popular position to take, right? So that is a position that you would expect a friend to take. But then there's times when it's like, okay, if we're friends, stand up for us, and these African countries don't do that. So definitely a topic for another day, but and I hope that gives some insight into the work that needs to be done.
Great question. And I know we're a little bit over, but it's Any last questions before we go? Because I'm looking around. I'm just seeing a lot of activity on all the platforms, which is amazing. We are going to end in just a moment, but I want to. Zephanie says hi. Shout out to Zephanie. She's watching us.
Oh my gosh, haven't heard or seen her in a while. Hey, Zeph.
She says she can listen to your voice all day. Let's see. No one else? And I hope we answered your question. You guys, once again, thank you so much. We'll be here every week, Monday at 8 p.m. Eastern time, discussing these things. We have events coming up. We'll be in Atlanta. Again, join our mailing list. We'll be in Atlanta later in September. There's a lot of stuff coming up in 2024, and we want to see you, want you to be a part of it. We want to be able to talk to you. It's all this screen stuff is great, but sometimes after a while, the radiation really starts to get to you, and it's really just better to be with someone face to face, shake their hand, high five them, whatever, and be in the same room with each other. So see where we're going to be. We'll be posting about that soon. We hope to see you. Again, scan the QR code, donate to IPSI, become a legacy builder, get a t-shirt, become a paid subscriber to our Substack. There are lots of ways to support what we're doing, and we very much appreciate it, y'all. Thank you so much, and you guys have a good rest of your week.
Bye.